Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Advancement Center and the continued reading of The Magic of Life by Robert Young. And I continue today with chapter 39. As Bill stepped out into the fresh air, he felt a sense of relief. He did not understand this unusual sense of relief. He loved Suzanne dearly, but as he stepped away from her presence, he felt the intrigue and the mystery disappear and be replaced by nature that he was so familiar with. He had known Suzanne for many years, and he had seen her at times when he knew he should have kept away. On this occasion, he felt that he was approaching that same time. The love between them was deep, but there was something else there that made him feel a little uncomfortable. It was not the sort of world that Bill was used to. The interaction with people and interaction with nature was so simple and enjoyable for Bill that he had never experienced a feeling of determination like he had just felt from Suzanne. Determination to find out something, to delve deeper, and Bill had no idea what she was delving into. For Bill to walk out amongst nature relieved his system totally and allowed him to change his focus very quickly to the job at hand. He knew his time was short and he wanted to drop into his old house, which was now just a little storage hut, as he wanted to collect some tools to do some more maintenance on his boat before he left the jetty. When he checked, he knew that he would be cutting things a little fine, and he was about to bypass his small hut when he got a very strong feeling that he should still go and collect the items that he needed. When he entered the hut, there was another sense that made him open the little box that Simon Guthridge had given them and to take out one coin and place it in his pocket. He had no idea why, but he did it, and as he leaned down to pick up his tools, he was suddenly jolted upright. It felt like someone had actually pulled him straight up. He looked around, but there was nobody there. He had a feeling of urgency, so he left his tools, shut the door, and headed off to the boat. When he got there, everything seemed to be in perfect order. His normal duties that he performed before he set off for the sea were done so quickly that he could not understand how he had got around it so fast. It was just like everything had gone into slow motion. He was getting everything done, but time wasn't moving on. As he started the engine, the boat came to life. He felt an enthusiasm that he hadn't felt before. When the boat turned so neatly for him and took off in the direction that he had wanted it to go, he knew that there was more at play than just him and his boat. The boat seemed to accelerate and move forward at a rate that it had not done previously. It was like he had the wind and the tide behind him, but in fact, his instruments had told him just the opposite. And he knew there was something special happening. He had never felt the boat move so fast, and he knew that it was going beyond its normal capability. He felt so proud of the way the boat was performing. He paddled the dash in front of him and said, "Good on you, fella. You're doing real well." He was sure that he got a response, as he often did when they handled a difficult sea together, but now he was heading towards a destiny that seemed to be a little distant from him. He decided to handle it by not being any different to how he was yesterday as he put his boat on autopilot. The little gadget he had created seemed to be such an advantage at these times because because when he set the small levers in place, he felt proud and thrilled at what the little device was doing for him. He proceeded down to the back of the boat to prepare all of his fishing gear, just the same as yesterday, but when he looked up, he expected to be well short of his mark because things had come together so quickly. He decided to just wander forward and to watch in case his mark came up a little early. As he entered the small cabin, he was surprised to see ahead of him exactly the same as yesterday, but some 100 yards further on, that same little boat that looked like a whale. It jumped out of the water and again skipped across the top of the water and spun around in circles before settling onto the water like a normal boat. It turned gradually and headed towards him. He had a little bit further to go to get to the mark, so he wondered what had happened. As he eased back on the engine, he realized that if he had gone to the mark, he would have been out of the lee of the main island where the winds were rather severe. He knew that he was dealing with someone who understood the water and who understood that he himself would have pulled back short of the mark and waited before signaling this new boat to come towards him rather than him heading into the bad waters. He wanted to get on that whale-like boat to see what it could do. He was not going to do that in bad weather. Bill looked down as the familiar whir of Willie Brotich's boat started again. He wasn't sure whether he was about to see the boat go down or the door open. Sure enough, the door opened and out came the smiling face of Willie Brotich, and Bill's heart jumped and his whole being settled. He liked this man and he was looking forward to spending time in his company. The boat gently pulled alongside. Up over the side came the same lines as yesterday. Bill tied off the line and dropped his ladder. Within minutes, that smiling face was showing over the side of Bill's boat. With a quick jump, Willie landed on the deck and immediately stuck his hand out to shake Bill's hand. Bill was so pleased that Willie had a strong handshake. He kind of judged people by the way they shook hands. This man, although he was rather a soft sort of person, had a very strong handshake. Bill knew that behind that was a character of meaning and certainty. "How are you, Bill?" asked Willie. "Excellent. I'm really feeling great today. Thanks, Willie," answered Bill. "It's good to see you again." "And you too, Bill," replied Willie. "You certainly got my mind ticking over last night. I've been thinking about all sorts of things since we met here yesterday." Bill smiled. "I think I've probably been going through the same thing as you, Willie. We seem to have a lot in common, and I think we've got a lot to talk about." "That's right," said Willie. "And let's get on with it then. Let's get down there and we'll make a cuppa." "Hold on," said Bill. "Before we do that, I want to have a look inside your boat." "No deal," said Willie. "We'll talk first." "Well, we'll have a cuppa. Then we'll go on your boat, and then we can talk," stated Bill. "You drive a hard bargain," said Willie. "No, I just don't want to miss out," answered Bill. Willie laughed and patted Bill on the shoulder before he wrapped his arms around his shoulder and said, "Come on, let's go get that cuppa," and off they went. While they were walking down the short section of the deck, Willie said, "I can assure you, Bill, you'll miss out on nothing, so we don't have to be tough with each other. We've got a full day, and we'll make sure we get through everything." Bill's eyes lit up when he heard a full day. Willie obviously had something in mind, something that Bill hadn't thought of. Coming out, meeting Willie, having a chat, and going for a run in the boat were the only things Bill had on his mind. He had never stretched his thoughts past that, but he knew that Simon Guthridge had looked past that. For just at that moment, Simon's face suddenly appeared before Bill's eyes, right there and then, when Bill felt that Willie had more on his mind than just go for a run. As the kettle began boiling, Willie said to Bill, "Bill, I think we should do a business deal. To do that, though, I think you should know a bit about me and what I do. I'm willing to take you back to my boat shed and show you everything, and to open all my doors to you so that we're able to talk. I know a fair bit about your family, but I don't know much about you. But from the look of this boat, this has been your life, and you seem to be the kind of man who I want alongside me." Bill switched off the kettle as it started to whistle. "Sounds good to me," I don't know much about what you're talking about, but I'm quite happy to look at everything. And I want you to know that the smuggling bit is not quite right. I'll fill you in on that as well, said Willie. I'm not worried about that, said Bill. I just need to experience that boat and go for a run and get to know more about you. You're a good man, Bill, replied Willie. I'm sure we'll get on well. Bill made the coffee and put it on the table. With a big smile, he said, I got it right this time, Willie. We do have coffee. Willie laughed and pulled his chair up to the table and took a sip. Bill was about to say, That's just been boiled, but it was too late. Willie had taken a sip, and to Bill's surprise, he never said a word. Willie took another sip, and Bill asked, Isn't that too hot for you? It probably is, but that's the way I drink it. I don't have too much feeling left in that area, said Willie. What, in your mouth? Asked Bill. No, in anything that hurts, answered Willie. It doesn't really matter much. I don't have much time for it. Too many things to do. That's a good way to look at things, said Bill. Bill had met people who were almost numb to life. He had also met people who were numb to pain, but he didn't think that Willie had reached that stage. He was quite surprised by Willie's reaction. Willie saw that look of surprise on Bill's face and said, It's all right, Bill. I've been drinking hot tea for a long time now, and I suppose that I'm just used to it. Hot coffee is the same. With a big smile on his face, Willie was trying to reassure Bill. Bill felt quite comfortable, though. Well, Willie, where do we go from here? I have got no idea what you have in mind, but I really would like to go for a ride in your boat. Okay, Bill, what we can do is jump in the Brotage Special, said Willie. Bill smiled. He could hardly wait. Yeah, that's what I call it, the Brotage Special. We can jump in and head back to the boat shed and have a bit of a look around, and you can see what I do. Then we can come for a run back out to your boat, or we can do a bit of fishing now and worry about the other later, suggested Willie. Well, the fish are on now. There won't be any later, said Bill, but I'm not really concerned about that. I don't need to fish today. I just had it in mind that I would. Well, what do you say? Asked Willie. Will we get into the special? Bill's eyes lit up immediately. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, then. Stay the boat and get the other anchor down, said Willie. I don't think there'll be any wind today, but you never know. It could change direction. If you pick up the wind that's coming across the coast, it might throw the boat around a bit. So stow everything properly and we'll get underway. Bill jumped out of his chair straight away and took Willie's coffee mug from him, gave it a quick wash, and stowed it in the cupboard. He closed the cover for the cooking area and stowed everything just as he would if he was heading into a storm. He moved up to the back of the boat and dropped the spare anchor with a loose rope. He wanted the boat to move around, but he needed a safety anchor just in case. It seemed like only a few minutes to Bill before Willie was at his side saying, Okay, are you finished? Let's go. And over the side they went and down into the Brotage Special. Bill had never seen anything like it. It was a lot smaller inside than outside, but there was still plenty of room. He thought to himself, I suppose things look a bit smaller when they're closed in. But when he put his arms out to check the measurements, he found it was actually larger than it looked. There was plenty of room for 4 people to move around easily and even to sleep. The amazing thing to Bill was there were seats that were so modern he had never seen them before, and they had belts to hold you in. There were 4 seats and plenty of room for storage, and all the seats were carrying nets and stowage that he had never seen before. There were also flat belts instead of ropes. As Bill took up a seat, Willie said, Not that one. Move forward with me and sit right beside me to balance the boat. Bill knew exactly what to do when Willie spoke, but he had no idea what to do with the belt. Willie showed him how to hook it up and how to settle himself before Willie flicked the switch and that familiar whir started again. Down came the cover or door or whatever it was, Bill had no idea what to call anything. It was all so new to him. It was so new that he didn't really want to ask too many questions. He simply looked around at everything and tried to take it all in. He watched Willie reach over to the control panels and flick a switch, and then heard the engines burst to life. Bill knew they were quite large, and he knew that the engines were much too big for the boat that he had. He was not surprised that it took off and skipped across the water. Bill had no idea how Willie controlled it, but he soon felt the power as the boat took off and almost leapt out of the water. He felt a sensation that he hadn't experienced previously. It was so exhilarating that he felt a sudden sense of excitement, a feeling he would never have imagined could occur in a boat. It was almost like the excitement he felt when he skied down the grassy slopes on the side of the island and reached speeds that he couldn't often control. It felt the same in this boat, and he wondered how you could control such a thing. When Willie pulled hard on the steering wheel and pulled the boat into an extremely tight turn, Bill didn't know what was happening. Suddenly, it was like the boat let go and it flipped over and rolled along the surface of the water. Bill felt an unexpected sense of fear, but when the boat righted itself, he felt a thrill that was totally surprising. He looked at Willie and he swore, "You idiot, Willie." Willie laughed with a belly laugh that filled the boat with noise and that could be heard well over the noise of the engines. Bill thought to himself that this Willie bloke was totally crazy, and although he seemed to love life, he was as game as you can be. Bill wondered if he would ever have such nerve to do the things that Willie did. As soon as the boat had righted itself, Willie was pressing down on the throttle again. They took off at a high speed in the protected waters behind the island, heading straight towards the rocky face. Bill would usually make sure he kept well clear of this area when he was fishing. When they were about 100 yards from the rocks, Willie pulled back on the throttle and leaned over and flicked another switch. Bill could hear the whirring sound of pumps that he was familiar with, but he could not see where it came from. It sounded just like his bilge pump, but much, much bigger. He looked around and couldn't see anything. Before he knew it, the boat began to sink. Bill opened his mouth and looked at Willie, but Willie didn't answer. The excitement within Bill couldn't be held back any longer. He asked Willie, "How did you do that? What are you doing?" Willie simply smiled and said nothing. He looked back at Bill and then looked back ahead of him to the controls. The boat had just gone below the surface as Willie flicked another switch, and on came the brilliant underwater lights. Bill moved forward in his seat and pressed up tight against the belt, but he still needed to look to see ahead of him and see everything that was showing underwater. Bill had done a lot of underwater work, but he had never seen anything like this with the bright lights. As the engines took up the pressure of the water, Willie pressed the lever forward and the boat took off underwater like a fish. There was great excitement for Bill. He had never imagined that you could do such a thing, and as they headed towards the rocks, he wondered where they were going. He knew there were many caverns in these rocks because he had fished there before and he had dived in that area, but he didn't know exactly where they were. Then, when he felt it was time to pay close attention to the rocks, he peered deeply into the dark caverns and tried to figure out where they were about to go. Willie manipulated the boat very smoothly into an opening in the rocks that was not much bigger than the boat, and he accelerated as they went into the cavern. He straightened the boat and then eased back again to nearly idle. They moved along smoothly and quietly in the water. Suddenly the light showed up a large opening. There was plenty to see when they broke through into the large cavern. It was like the lights became brighter, but in fact, there must have been a lot of reflection from above the water. Bill looked around but could not see much except the reflection of the water, and as they came to a halt, he could just make out the timber framework of a jetty above them. Bill was so interested in everything that he was like a little child looking around everywhere. taking in everything, watching every movement of Willie. He watched the angle of the boat and was figuring out what direction they were facing and feeling the performance of the engines. With a slight reverse thrust from the engine, Bill knew that had reached their destination. He was not at all surprised when the whir of the pumps started again, only this time they were working much harder. They were pumping water out, and as they did, up came the boat. There was a sudden rush of air where they had obviously sucked out the water, and it had to fill the air. Bill was conscious of all these things and wondered how they had ever developed such a thing. When the boat broke through the surface of the water, it sat steadily on the surface. Willie flicked off the switches that shut down the lights and the pumps, then flicked the switch to open the door. That familiar whir of the door opening began and filled Bill's ears once again. As soon as the doors were open, Willie flicked off the engines of the Voltage Special and in almost one movement unleashed his and Bill's belts. He swung around in his seat and asked Bill, "What did you think of that?" Bill was so amazed by everything, he was lost for words. He really didn't know what Willie meant by the question because he was looking around in the area where they had just docked, and he could not believe what he was seeing there either. There was so much equipment, so many facilities. It was like a miniature dock. So he didn't know whether Willie was asking about the ride or about the cabin. He flicked his eyes backwards and forwards from one to the other and then decided he would answer to both. "Willie, I'm totally amazed by the boat, and I'm totally amazed by all the equipment you have here. I've got a rough idea where we are, but I had no idea these caves were here," answered Bill. "No, we didn't know either," explained Willie. "We just happened on them when we were digging out the foundations for our boat shed. We didn't tell anybody, so we've used them ever since. It makes it easy to get in and out without anybody knowing." Bill smiled and put up his index fingers. "Ah, the smugglers, hey?" Willie went on to explain. "That's right. That's what we were at one stage. We smuggled anything and everything, but it was not against the law. We just smuggled it in so nobody knew. We would bring things in and out, and we dealt with people from other countries because nobody thought you could. We didn't want to cause a big reaction. We just worked away in the background, but ended up getting some sort of name for ourselves that caused us a few problems. Though we still thought it was better just to keep everything quiet. We made a lot of money, but it was a bit difficult because we lived in a place where money was not much use to us. It still isn't, but I believe we can still do some more work off the island and we can do something with money. I've got a fair bit stashed away, and every now and then I do a deal with those blokes in Norwich. Yeah, I've got a couple of friends there. Old Olson was not too bad to deal with, and his son's not too bad either, though the old fella's gone now." Bill could not believe his ears. How could the world be so small? How could it be that he just met somebody who popped up out of the sea, who knew Henry Olson? "I know Henry," said Bill. "Wow, how the hell did you do that?" asked the surprised Willie. "I met him in the bush, actually, up amongst the trees in the Joseph Hill area," answered Bill. "Yeah, I've heard about that area, though I don't know it too well. I don't go inland too much. I prefer the sea, and I'm pretty busy here. There used to be 8 of us, but it's down to just me now," said Willie. "8 of you?" asked Bill, a little surprised. "Yeah, we had to take some of them back to the mainland. We couldn't leave them around here. They'd wreck everything for us. But they didn't know much about the island, though. We brought them in and they worked for us. They didn't go anywhere, and we just took them back home. When John decided I was too much of a rat bag and he really wanted to make a lot of money, he said he'd go and do it on the other side of the island. So that's what he does. He gives me a job every now and then, but basically this place doesn't do much now," said Willie. "What do you think you're going to do with it?" asked Bill. "Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I've been having a bit of fun. I was pretty busy building this thing, so it's about time I started to do something and started to look forward a bit. Yesterday I was determined I would find a way to do something, and when I popped up out of the water and you rolled over me, it was a pretty good signal to me. I seem to get answers pretty quickly when I want them, though I didn't expect that one. You frightened the hell out of me, actually, said Willie. Bill laughed again, only this time it was a much deeper laugh. He could see the humor, and he could see the deep humor in leaping up out of the water and finding you've just run into the front of another boat. In the middle of his laughter, he said to Willie, "You know, you could have killed yourself, Willie. If I hadn't been up there at the wheel, and if I hadn't changed the rudder the other day, there's no way in the world I could have missed you," said Bill. "Well, there you are. There you go. A man's got to be lucky sometimes, and I think I've been pretty lucky. I'm pretty sure that we've come together so that both of us can figure out what to do. I've got some feeling about you. You're not the same fella who simply drives a boat. I think you've got a lot of other things to do in the world, and maybe I can help," said Willie. Bill started to get a sense of something growing, something coming together, something starting to form, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He didn't know what to say to Willie. He looked at Willie and said, "You never know, Willie. I have no idea at this moment. I'm still a little bit lost." "Yeah, I suppose that's possible too," said Willie. "It would be nice to be lost. But anyway, let's get on with what we're doing. We'll have a look around here, and then we'll get up there to the boat shed." Willie stood up and stuck his body through the space where the door opened. There was a small rope hanging above, and he pulled the rope, and you could hear the whir of another machine. Bill looked around but couldn't see what it was. The next thing he saw was a crane lowering down around the boat, and as it became obvious what it was, the special arms flopped down and clicked into place in what seemed to be some special attachment on either side of the boat, front and back. Willie let the rope go and sat down once again and leaned over the control panel and pressed another button. Bill felt the strain come upon the boat, and he knew that they were being winched. As the strain came up on the winch, it slowed and gently lifted the boat out of the water, and as soon as it was out of the water, it started to accelerate. It was something he had not experienced before, and he was suddenly lifted out of the water. He felt like he was flying. It had happened that quickly, he almost lost his breath. As quickly as it had happened, the boat started to slow down again, and the whir of the winch changed tone until it came to a sudden stop with a clunk. As soon as the clunk occurred, Willie jumped up and said, "Righto, out we go." He leapt out up onto gunwale of the boat and stepped off onto the platform. Bill followed, but he couldn't see much as the lights were fairly dim and had a reddish tinge about them. As soon as they got off the boat, the whir and the door closing started again. Bill looked back at the door closed and wondered how Willie had done that. Suddenly, the whole area was full of light. He had not seen Willie switch anything on, but somehow all the lights came on. "How did all that happen?" Bill asked in amazement. "Automation. Have you heard of that word?" asked Willie. "No, I haven't," said Bill. "Well, it's just automatic, and everything is done one thing after the other," explained Willie. "As we move along, other things will happen. I started the sequence when we got out of the boat, and then as we move along, everything works for us." Then off Willie went into a slow walk. "Follow me," he said. Sure enough, as they walked along, a door opened without Willie touching anything, and through they went, and the door closed behind them. It was as if they had stepped into another world. They were on a timber ramp that was sort of halfway up the wall of the boat shed, a monstrous boat shed with two very large vessels sitting in dock. Bill looked at Willie and asked, "Wow, is this your boat shed?" "Sure enough, this is our boat shed, John's and mine. We haven't decided what to do as yet. We don't know who owns what, but it doesn't matter because we could never get rid of it anyway. John's got another boat around the other side that's bigger than these, said Willie. Bill looked down at the large fishing vessels. They were too large for local fishing, and they weren't anything he had seen on the coast. He was about to ask Willie about it, but Willie got in first and said, "Later. I'll talk to you later about all of this stuff. Let's go into the hut and we'll warm ourselves up with a cuppa and have a talk." Off they went along the platform and then around to the end of the boat shed and out of the door to reveal the small hut or cottage. Willie called it home. When Bill saw Willie's home, he felt good. Everything was back to normal, and it was to the level that Bill understood. As he walked in through the door and followed Willie, he felt the warmth and the comfort of this nice little home that Willie referred to many times during their talks. As they walked in the door and hung up their coats, Willie turned to Bill and said, "Welcome to my home, Bill. This is the place where I live. This is where everything happens. All out there is where everything used to happen. So I suppose you'll go for another cup of coffee and a bite to eat." "You've got me. I'd love a cup of coffee and I could eat a horse," replied Bill. "No, we don't eat horses around here. In fact, I don't even think we've got a horse. But yeah, we've got plenty to eat," answered Willie. Bill laughed and Willie joined in to laugh along with him. They had become great friends in only a matter of a few hours, and they both recognized the value of their friendship. Bill was starting to loosen up a little. He had forgotten all about the small warning that Simon Guthridge had given him, and he had forgotten about the fact that the pending deal had to be checked with Simon to make sure that Bill knew what he was talking about. In fact, Bill was starting to feel quite independent. He knew that Willie was a special person, and although he didn't know too much about him at this stage, he knew that he had no intention of causing Bill any difficulty. The thing that he did not know was that Willie had already got to a point where he had lost sight of how everything can work. He had everything at his fingertips, but he couldn't do anything with it. He had 2 large vessels and the Brotage Special, but he didn't know what to do with it. Bill was quite oblivious to this problem. Somehow Willie knew that Bill could solve his problems. He didn't know what it was that he could feel, but he knew that an association with Bill was all that was required. Willie soon had lunch prepared, and they both sat down and quietly and enthusiastically devoured the entire meal. They both finished around the same time, and as they sat back and started to sip on their coffee, they both felt extremely comfortable in each other's presence. Bill's confidence had risen enormously, and so when he leaned back after he had sipped the coffee, he asked, "Well, Willie, what do you have in mind?" "I'm not sure, Bill, but I know that it's time to get things moving again, but this time in a different direction, and somehow I know your input can make a difference," said Willie. Bill listened intently and nodded his head as Willie finished his sentence. Willie continued, "I have all this equipment, lots of know-how, a lot at my fingertips, and I know how to make money, but I don't know what to do with it. I really don't have the drive to do what I did before. I don't want to go running backwards and forwards in the middle of the night, taking contraband to different places. I don't want to have to fight with people to get what I need. I already have everything that I need, and all of this stuff that's sitting here is of no use to John or me. John's boat is sufficient for him, and he doesn't need these. There's no market for these boats in this area. I could probably sell them somewhere else, but then all I'd end up with is a little bit more cash, and I don't really know what to do with it. Somehow, when I saw your boat and saw how you cared for it and how well you handled it and how comfortable you were with your life, I knew that I had to have some of that. What I want to do is some sort of deal with you, Bill, so we can work together. I know that you've got something behind you that will inject what's needed into my business, and I know that I have all of the resources you need to produce what you want for your life. Please don't ask me to explain all of that. It's just something that I know. Bill nodded slowly as he took it all in. I kind of have the same feeling, Willie, that I sort of know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure what direction I'm going in. So I'm not really sure how all this can come about. There are a few things, though, that I'd actually like to talk to you about. What say I just sort of babble on and see what happens? That's fine, said Willie. That's just what I need. Bill sat back and looked into that familiar space out in nowhere where he always found that special connection, where things seemed to come to him without any effort. As he looked into that space, he went on, Willie, my main aim at the moment is to make sure that my family is well looked after, even though I'm not married at this stage. I have a family and I'll be married soon. Anything we do must take that into account. I also want to do something for the people of this island. I'm not sure what I can do, but I know that it's not a matter of winning them anything. It's a matter of leading them out of the dark. Somehow I don't feel it's dark, but I know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I seem to be the one who is leading our small part of the island towards something, though I don't know what it is. I could tell you a lot of little stories about what's been happening to me, but basically, what's happening is both Suzanne and I are being led on a daily basis by Simeon. Simeon is the spirit or entity or whatever who appears from time to time. He's a very special character who looks after the island. Willie kept nodding as Bill continued. Simeon seems to be very interested in what we're doing, and he is showing us many, many things. He's showing us that we have abilities that we didn't know we had, and he's also supporting us in making sure that we do manage to eat. He's making sure that Suzanne and I are in total contact with each other at all times, and he's also the one who makes the arrangements for me to meet with Henry Olson. He pulled Willem in alongside to teach us more about the world, and he arranged for Carmel Roberts to pass on information to Suzanne. All the time he seems to be controlling what's happening, and I'm sure he's controlling our meeting, explained Bill. Willie was so eager to get a word in, so he waved his hands in front of Bill to get his attention, and Bill's focus came back as he looked into Willie's eyes and said, I'm sorry, Willie. I was a little away from here then. That's great. I do want you to go back there, said Willie, but I just wanted to tell you that's the same character who talks to me. It's got to be. How did you know his name was Simeon? Suzanne was told, answered Bill. Wow, I've never known his name. He talks very clearly, doesn't he? Said Willie. Bill grinned. He sure does. That's all I had to say, said Willie. Keep going, Bill. Bill sat back once again and looked back into that space, and sure enough, he knew Simeon was there, so he continued. Willie, it's not long now before I have to leave the island, though I will be back. I have to go. I don't know why that is, but to be able to leave the island, I have to know a lot more about how money works, and somehow I know that what I've got in my pocket is really important to you. Right now I'm being told to actually show you. Bill put his hand in his pocket and pulled out the gold coin. Willie's eyes opened wide, and they began to sparkle. He was about to say something, but Bill put his hand up to stop him. Bill continued, Willie, I know you have some sort of history where this means something special to you, and I know that somehow it's going to mean a lot more after what I have to say. Simeon has arranged for this to come to us through Simon Guthridge, and this is just one of many. But one of the conditions of us having this is that we understand how it works and that we know what we're doing before we do anything with the coins. Simeon now tells me that we'll never lose the coins, but they will be our security. I don't know what that means, but I feel that you know, Willie. Simeon's now telling me that we should talk more about what we think we might be able to do so that he can guide us into knowing the reality of our connection. Bill was starting to feel extremely comfortable in passing on Simeon's words. He relaxed a little more and said, Willie, Simeon feels that you've been holding up a bit of a barrier between him and yourself for a while now. He'd like you to let he'd like to let you know that he's still around and that what happened to you and to John was meant to happen, and that what has happened to the Brotich fortune was also meant to happen. It had to disappear so that it could come back in another form. Willie's face looked very serious when he heard that. Bill continued, how it's going to come back is not really clear at this point, and we're not able to all get together and figure anything out, but Simeon tells me that it will come and it will come fast. Also, the fortune won't be stored. It will be useful and it won't be harsh like it was before. It will be enjoyable and thrilling. He says that many people will gain, not just the few who were digging in and withdrawing whatever they could before. Willie's frown began to disappear because he'd worked so hard over the past years. He didn't want to do the same again. He didn't want to go into rebuilding what they called the Brotich fortune. He didn't need it. Bill could feel what was happening and said, I'll ask Simeon if he's got any more information for you. That's fine, agreed Bill. Bill sent the message out to Simeon through his mind and received an immediate answer. Simeon's reply came, just continue day by day, step by step, and we'll make sure you know what's happening each moment. Don't look too far ahead and don't be concerned about planning. If we tell you what's to happen in the future, it's not so that you can do anything about it. It's so that you have a rough idea at this stage what will happen in the future. It's only done to make you comfortable, but also remember that if we tell you something now, you'll see it differently at the time it happens. So be comfortable and work together and make sure that you include the resources that I've put there for you. Simeon addressed Bill. Bill, remember, Simon Guthridge and Willem are there to direct you in how everything will work. Bill had almost forgotten where he was sitting. He had almost forgotten that Willie was in front of him. He was feeling connected to that marvelous awareness that came whenever Simeon was close, and when Simeon started to withdraw, Bill felt a little bit of sorrow. When he looked at Willie and found that Willie was feeling the same, he leaned over and patted Willie on the shoulder. Looks like we're being looked after, Willie. Willie's eyes were moist. He couldn't speak. He waited in silence for a moment before looking over to Bill. Wow, that's all I needed, Bill. I think we're okay now. How about we have another cuppa and then we'll talk some more? Bill nodded quietly and they both got up and walked over to make the coffee together. It wasn't long before the ideas began rushing into their heads. They had hardly started to drink their coffee when the ideas started leaping out in front of them. They began talking about how they could use their boats, how they could work, how they could get fish, how they could store things, how they could actually arrange new contracts overseas, and how they could modify the large vessels to travel to the mainland, and how the local fishermen could start to sell their fish through Brotich. They talked about how Bill could go out and look into other countries for what was needed and how the lessons on the use of money that Simon had given them yesterday could be put into practice in a big way. Bill could not believe what was coming out of his mouth, and Willie was so excited. I've never heard anything like all of this, and it seems to be coming to me as well. This is really something, said Willie. The excitement grew to a point where they both jumped up from the table. Agreed. Right. Let's do it. Have we got a deal? Asked Willie, putting out his hand. You're on, answered Bill as he took Willie's hand in his. They shook hands and looked at one another and threw everything to the wind. They gave each other a big hug. Two friends became one in that moment. Bill and Willie made a force that was greater than anything either of them had ever imagined. After what seemed like quite a long time, Willie stepped back from Bill and said, Right-o, mate. Let's go and have a look at the shed. We've always called it the shed, but we may have to change that. Anyway, let's have a look at it. We won't do the boats yet. We'll just have a quick look at the shed, then we'll jump in the special and head back to your boat. If everything looks all right, I'll give you a bit of a hand with the fishing so that you don't go home empty-handed. Bill's eyes lit up at the prospects of another run in the Broted Special. He also felt the delight of someone offering to help him fish. So with their arms around one another, off they went out into the boat shed again for Bill's second tour. This time a little more detailed, but still quite quick. It wasn't long before the whir of the winches started and Bill and Willie disappeared into the water to head off back out to Bill's boat. As the engines of the Broted Special roared to life, Willie sat back and took control of the path out through the caves, through the gorge, and into the open waters. Bill watched intently, and he knew that it would not be long before he was doing the same. Willie was very comfortable with what he had done, and being the builder of the boat and everything in it, he knew exactly what the boat's capability was. So his precise movements of the throttle, the steering wheel, the small rudder, and all the other special controls that Bill was not familiar with seemed to be so smooth to Bill and so easy. He had a feeling that he would be able to do the same, but when the boat leapt out of the water and rolled over on its side, and there was no vision and no sense of what direction you were going in, he had second thoughts. Willie even seemed to struggle a little, and then the boat righted itself and settled in the water. As the wash came over the boat, Bill knew they were in rough weather. It was something he hadn't even considered. He had no sense of the weather, but obviously the wind had changed and the rough seas had come in close. He felt very happy that he had dropped the spare anchor. Willie turned to Bill and said, "We'll have to be careful on this one, son. We won't have an easy transfer onto your boat. I think we can forget the fishing for today. I think this little baby won't handle sitting alone without the engines running. It doesn't like the anchor too much, so we might have to leave the fishing to another day." Bill understood immediately. "That's fine. Do you have enough gear on board so that we can throw a grapnel hook over the gunwale?" Willie replied, "No. It will all have to be hands-on stuff. If you fall in the water, then I'll just have to pull you out, and you'll have to do it again." Bill looked at Willie. "I'm not going in the water." "That's fine," said Willie. "Don't worry, we'll make it, son. Just remember, when we get up close alongside, you'll have to go on the outside, and I'll have to close the door on you. When we come up alongside, I'll throw it into reverse and lift the nose right up and almost catapult you over the side. If we bump the side, don't worry about it." Bill looked at him and asked, "Can you do that?" Willie smiled and answered, "Watch me. But remember, if you go in the drink, don't worry about it. I'll pick you up." Bill felt a little bit tight around the chest as he breathed in and said, "Right, let's do it." Willie immediately pushed forward the throttle, and the engines roared as the boat leapt high in the water and started bouncing across the waves on the way out to Bill's boat. As the boat came into sight, Willie indicated to Bill that he had better get ready. He eased back on throttle to where the boat was sitting nicely but traveling forward in the water. The whir of the door opening signaled to Bill that he had better get on deck. As the door came to the open position, Bill was straight out and onto the deck. It was quite a sloping deck, and he had very little to hang on to. As soon as he was out, the whir started up again and the door shut behind him. He was out there without any line, no handrails, and just a small bollard to hang on to. He looked back through the windscreen, and Willie was pointing him towards the nose of the boat. He wanted him right up on the bow. Bill edged his way along the main curve of the boat, still with nothing to hang on to, and took a great lunge forward to grab the front bollard. He again looked back at Willie, and Willie gave him the thumbs up. Bill sat there hanging tightly onto the bollard, trying to get his legs around so that he had his feet wedged in underneath his backside. He held on as tightly as he could, and as Willie brought the boat up alongside, without any indication of what was happening, Bill could only wait. Suddenly, he felt the boat accelerate, and the nose leapt way into the air. As it rose, Bill knew that he had to let go of the bollard, and as he leapt, he was expecting to catch onto the gunwale, but the force was such that it threw him right over the gunwale, and he landed flat on his back in the middle of the deck on his boat. He bounced and skidded and hit up against the ropes. He felt a sharp prod in his side as he came to a halt. He looked around, and there was the edge of the winch right up against his side. He wondered what would have happened if he had gone a little bit further. He was feeling a bit sore, but he was okay. He got to his feet and gave Willie the thumbs up over the side, and then raced in and started his engines. They started first go, and everything seemed completely normal to Bill. He then moved down to the back and hauled in the spare anchor. The boat was tossing around a lot, but it was fine. As Bill winched up the main anchor, he moved forward, and the boat finally became controllable. When he eventually got underway, he moved in towards the rocks to protect Willie's boat as it went back in through the bad seas. Just that little bit of protection from Bill's boat made all the difference. Willie found that he could drive his boat normally, and he was very comfortable sitting on the leeward side of Bill's boat. Bill knew exactly what to do when it came to the sea. He knew that the advantage he had in the large vessel could be passed on to the small vessel very easily just by sitting alongside it. He then realized that was exactly what Willie was doing with his company. He was going to put it alongside Bill and allow him to do what he needed to do, and it wouldn't affect him at all. It was at this point Bill saw Simon Guthrie's face again, and he realized that he had learned the lesson that Simon was starting to pass to him. The lesson was to look at everything, see everything, and then bring it back to where Simon and himself could talk. As they reached the calmer waters, Bill backed off the throttles and allowed Willie to move on. Willie hadn't gone far before he began to disappear under the water. Bill laughed to himself and thought, that Willie bloke is a bit of a show-off. There he goes, under the water again. He knew that Willie would have to come up again before he got too far because he would run out of air by the time he got right down into the mooring area. Sure enough, it wasn't too long before he saw the Voltage Special come up and show itself. Just long enough to suck in a bit more air like a whale, and down it went before it disappeared into the caves and the rocks. Bill immediately turned his boat and headed towards home. He was feeling good, and the day had gone extremely fast. He hadn't had time to check anything, and he didn't even know what the time was. But he knew he had sufficient time to get back and moor his boat safely and go along the track to see Simon before he got home. He knew that Suzanne would be away all day and probably into the night because the trip from home and then out to see Carmel in her home would be a little longer than normal. There was no reason for him to think this, but he knew, and he was totally confident in the fact that he had plenty of time to visit Simon. The trip back to the jetty was uneventful, and the boat handled beautifully. As he pulled in, he knew that Suzanne would not be there, and it felt a little lonely not to have her and the children rushing up to meet him. He thought to himself the job would still be easy because he didn't have any fish to unload, nothing major to pack up, and all he had to do was shut down the boat, store everything, cover everything, and do a little running maintenance before leaving. It wasn't long before he had finished his chores and headed off along the road to see Simon Guthrie. And that ends chapter 39. And I wish you a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.